of the pilot and use case frontier.
Thanks very much, David. What a great panel that was. You know, we began the program earlier with a great discussion, and I enjoyed Tom Mutton's emphasis on the retail use of CBDC, and then juxtapositioned against Supendu's discussion about both the wholesale and then the retail efforts that are going on in Southeast Asia. Well, this panel now is going to take a chance to drill down into the retail side of that, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kabir Kumar, who's the director at Flourish Ventures, which is an evergreen fund that makes impact-oriented investments in personal finance management tools, challenger banks, regulatory innovations, and other technologies that empower people to foster a fairer, more inclusive economy. Kabir is a graduate of the Maxwell School of Syracuse University. And in addition to Flourish, Kabir serves with me on the advisory board of the Alliance for Innovative Regulation. And also Shelley Swanbank, President, Product and Platform at Western Union. In a role, Shelley advances Western Union's dynamic cross-border and cross-currency global platform to support the company's expansion to multiple customer segments. Previously, Shelley was Group Operating Officer for Accenture Digital, establishing it as a market leader in digital services. And Shelley holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Finance and Computer Information Systems from Colorado State University. And finally, we're joined by Usman Ahmed, Head of Global Public Policy at PayPal. His work covers a variety of global issues, including financial services regulation, innovation, international trade, and entrepreneurship. And Ahmed is also an adjunct professor at law at Georgetown University Law School, along with Daniel Gorfine, where Ahmed teaches courses on international law and public policy issues related to the internet. He earned his JD from the University of Michigan, his MA from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and his BA from the University of Maryland. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And let's start off with the value of domestic retail CBDC, as distinct, say, from wholesale uses and other. What gets each of you excited about the potential value a CBDC can drive? And maybe, Shelley, maybe you would lead off.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. You know, I think for me, if I had to pick one use case, if you will, it really is about being able to get public money straight into the hands of citizens. And I think, as Josh said, we probably all understand that use case better than ever now, given the COVID situation over the last many months, and governments around the world trying to get money directly in the hands of citizens, whether that's for stimulus funds or, let's say, normal benefits, if you will, maybe even disaster relief. You think about being able to get money directly in the hands of consumers in disaster relief scenarios. I think that's super exciting. And I guess the other thing that is exciting is just who knows where this will lead, right? Every innovation leads to another innovation. And so I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I think the idea of people talk about financial inclusion, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but I think perhaps this could yield better financial inclusion for some underserved communities.
That's great. Usman?
Yeah, let me put a finer point on what Shelley's raising and what Josh highlighted when it comes to the stimulus payments in particular. 20 million Americans received checks of the 100 or so plus million that received payments from the government. Some of them took as long as 3 or 4 months to actually receive their check. And you can imagine living on the margins, living paycheck to paycheck, and waiting 3 or 4 months to actually get the money that the government is saying is yours. That is a serious challenge, and something that retail CBDC, from our perspective, could be really interesting to help fix. I'd expand it beyond that. You know, Governor Powell has talked about grants for small businesses in the next wave of relief. I mean, again, that would be something that presumably could be done through a CBDC. And then, you know, tax refunds. There are tons and tons of bills and payments that government has with individual citizens and businesses. And so, you know, improving that entire system is something that, you know, we are excited to understand and see if we can be helpful with.
It's a system that certainly can use some improvements. I saw a statistic that somewhere in those relief distribution, over a million separate deceased individuals received close to over $1 billion in relief payments. That's certainly not going to stimulate any economic activity, but it's just a and inefficiency in the system. Kabir, from your point of view, what gets you excited about CBDC in the retail context?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks. It's great to be here. I think we also spoke on the sidelines at the Singapore FinTech Festival over a year ago. I think Usman, Shelley, and I seem to be singing from the same song sheet here. We actually commissioned McKinsey to look at the relationship between government response and digital infrastructure components. They looked at 11 programs, 6 countries. The US is at the bottom of the list, in part because the core public infrastructure, the public-private infrastructure failed. And so I think that's what's exciting us. The way I see CBDC, Chris, Usman, and Shelley is like the internet, right? I mean, we need it, and it's going to unlock all this private innovation. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we need it. And we need that infrastructure investment like we made in the internet many years ago. There are 4 areas where I think that it's going to make an immediate impact, and it's already coming into view based on all the discussion we heard today. On payments, the distribution of money right into people's wallets, on identity, as you alluded, Chris, on data sharing, and also on the regulatory system, the regulatory reporting and AML system that complements that.
That's terrific. It's funny you mentioned that we met on the sidelines at the Singapore FinTech Festival last year. Well, the festival's coming up again this year. And Matt, it's remarkable how different it's going to be, what a difference that year has made in COVID. The festival is going to be much more of an online experience, but I'm delighted to be participating, so we'll have to find a way to be on the sidelines of it once again. But let's drill down a little bit more into financial inclusion, because I think that it's one of the things that's changed in the last year. Constituencies that hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about CBDC, I think because of the inexactitude of delivering relief during the crisis and the recognition of the 6% of at least the US population that's unbanked and maybe 25% that's underbanked, a lot of folks that hadn't thought much about CBDC are suddenly thinking about it as perhaps a means of addressing that unbanked and underbanked population. Shelley, can I go back to you to give us some thoughts? I know with your work at Western Union, populations that perhaps are not considered to be fully banked have long been constituents for yours. How do you think about CBDC and how it may be utilized to address some of these populations?
Yeah. Well, first, I guess the first point is access will be important, right? We talk about financial inclusion, but digital inclusion will be important too, because some people that are underserved by current digital solutions, it's usually for a couple reasons. One, they may not have access on a regular basis to, smartphone, the internet. They may live somewhere that access isn't pervasive for them. And 2, they don't trust the system. So I think what's going to be very important for any implementation of CBDC is to create that trust. And perhaps, some of these underserved citizens, by getting money directly, stimulus money, benefit money, tax returns, et cetera, directly through a CBDC, that will begin to then establish trust for other sorts of, bank or other digital solutions. And so I think that could have a nice knock-on effect and help from an overall financial inclusion perspective.
It's so interesting that you mentioned trust, right? Because trust is one of the notion of centralized providers of trust and perhaps replacing them with more of a decentralized consensus development of trust is so critical to this new technology. And so maybe, Usman, I might ask you, as you think about it, as PayPal has built networks, trusted networks that people can use to conduct commerce online and elsewhere, how do you think about underserved populations and how CBDC may perhaps provide the trust element that wasn't there for them not to engage in the financial system to the extent that was the barrier for them?
Yeah, look, I before I jump into trust, I'd just say, I appreciate you taking this broader lens of financial inclusion. So certainly the FDIC survey that found that about 5% of Americans are unbanked. The number one reason they reported as to why they're unbanked is they don't have the money to put into the bank, right? And so to Shelley's point, if you've if you're getting money directly put in, you're probably much more likely to want to use the system. So there's just an interesting kind of very obvious almost reason there. But then when it comes to trust and ubiquity and usage, I think you're talking not just about 5% of people. You mentioned 25% of people underbanked, meaning they've used a non-bank financial service, but 47% of Americans don't have $400 in savings, right? So it's actually a lot broader of the population that needs a lot of help when it comes to financial services. And so, I think trust is a big part of that. I think usage and ubiquity, the ability to buy stuff online, buy stuff, what you need in person, send money to people you need, receive money, and get credit, as Kabir was talking about, I think, and alluding to, the ability to add on services in an efficient and clean way on top of the payments. That's really where I think what we've been alluding to, that the innovation that could be built on top of a baseline payment system is very, very exciting. And again, that's something that I think we could be helpful with, but I think a lot of players in the financial services ecosystem can plug into this and benefit from it.
Thank you. Kabir, would you want to jump in on the ability to reach underserved populations with this new innovation?
Yeah, we've been talking about the U.S., but there are an estimated 1.7 billion people globally who are outside the formal financial system. And they're outside the formal financial system, but as all of us know, they are using cell phones. And in some countries, they are leapfrogging from basic cell phones to smartphones. So there's a way to reach them. And over the last 10 years, it's actually been technology-driven innovations that have brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal financial sector. CBDC, I suspect, will play a big part in the next 10 years to bring people into the formal financial sector. But I think there's something beyond inclusion. And that's what I think Usman and Shelly were getting at, which is once people are in the formal financial system, is it working for them? And we talked about payments. I think throughout today, we've been addressing sort of from the wholesale to the retail aspect of payments and the ability to move and settle money instantly. And this is a game changer. It's a life changer for people who have less money. And Aaron Klein at Brookings has documented how low-income Americans could retain over $10 billion annually in their bank account if money moved faster. Because if money moved faster, they don't need to use check cashers, they don't need to use payday lenders, they are not subjected to bank overdraft fees. So the power of systems that work better, that are efficient, that are instant, that are real-time, which CBDC promises, is not only inclusion, but it's fairness, building a fair financial world that ultimately has the greatest impact on the most vulnerable.
So let's take it from sort of that high-level view down to real practicalities. Kabir, in your investment work at Flourish, you probably see a lot of opportunities, a lot of innovations of a very practical nature. What are some of the trends you're seeing? What are perhaps some of the actual applications that maybe get you excited, that you think hold promise for the longer term?
Chris, as I was saying earlier, I see CBDC, the sort of government official part as well as the tokenized infrastructure, like the internet. I feel it's the next it's the next internet element for us. We build the internet, but we never build the internet of money. So it's very hard to predict what business models will emerge. We didn't know that then. We didn't know eBay would emerge and it would change the world, for example. But we are actively investing in the private financial infrastructure. In fact, the private financial infrastructure just driving the front-end retail innovation is getting completely revamped right now. This is all areas: payments, identity, AML, fraud. We are actively making investments in all of those spaces. And at the same time, finance is becoming, as a lot of my venture capitalist colleagues like to say, embedded in all our digital experiences. The Etsy payments, for example, the ability to get payments, process payments, the ability to get access to credit is being embedded in all these digital apps and all these digital experiences. Again, infrastructure players are driving that. My view is that, entities that have a stablecoin component in that or have a tokenized component in that, they are going to arguably get turbocharged when CBDC comes into existence. So we are keeping an eye on that. We haven't made active investments in that space. The other big trend is what Usman mentioned, right? 70% of Americans are still struggling. Actually, 70% of Americans that are financially unhealthy by some measure. There are 8 dimensions that the Financial Health Network looks at. Disproportionately Black and brown households. We just did a study that looked at gig workers We call it Digital Hustle. It's a multi-country study. We focused on the US. Again, huge impact of the COVID crisis, as all of us know, again, disproportionately impacting Black and brown households. We are making these infrastructure investments because we believe it will unleash front-end innovation. I have due diligence companies that have really interesting ideas to give people access to investment opportunities, give people access to savings opportunity, as Usman mentioned, new credit products, but they struggle to build and configure those products on the existing infrastructure. They need a better infrastructure to bring those pieces together. Those are the trends that we are seeing that we are excited about.
That's very interesting. You know, in our work at the Digital Dollar Project over the course of 2020, when we talk about retail usage, one issue that just seems to come up again and again and again, it's a very important one. It's the issue of privacy, and it's the issue of what should be the expectations for retail use of CBDC of the individual for their privacy rights. How similar is it to the use of, say, the dollar in the cash markets, and what's the balance, the legitimate balance of that between the needs of law enforcement and the official sector to monitor transactions for, you know, really bad things, money laundering, drug trafficking, human sex trafficking, the kind of things that I think society expects law enforcement to oversee. How do we get that balance right? And perhaps, you know, where would you put the balance in that scale? Because we do have the ability to choose these balance points as design elements as we design CBDC. Where would you put it? Maybe Usman, I might turn to that because I'm sure privacy is an important issue for PayPal and something you've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Absolutely. Let me you know, largely agree with you that it's just a very challenging policy choice because, as you highlighted, certainly individual citizen privacy is an incredibly important value. As is, you know, making sure that our financial system is not being used for inappropriate, you know, terrorist financing or money laundering or criminal activity. And it's an issue that PayPal has you know, dealt with since our inception. And actually, this whole concept of tokenization that is so central to CBDC and the broader conversation, that's what we kind of architected 20 years ago to protect people's credit card information or bank information, right? It was setting up a token. It's the same concept that we're talking about here. So I don't know if I can answer the policy choice. I think the good part is we actually have a policy choice to make, whereas with other forms of payment, you might not have that policy choice. The last thing I'd just add, though, is the other dimension to this is, as we mentioned, there will be layers built on top of this. And one could imagine a digital wallet provider offering a privacy or a security solution on top of the CBDC that might be tailored to a particular consumer's desire, whether that's to share a lot more information than others or to share a lot less. So I wouldn't look at it purely in the first layer of issuance as an issue. It's actually something that will build out towards the broader financial services ecosystem.
Great. And Shelley, I might ask you the same question, because there too, I think that's something you probably spent a lot of time thinking about at Western Union as well.
Yeah, I maybe just building on what Usman had to say, I think there will be different options about how to implement this. I think ultimately this will be critical for a CBDC to flourish, right? Is to be able to do both. I suppose maybe just taking a bit of a different view, instead of thinking of it as a balance between one or the other, it really is a requirement to do both, right? I mean, keeping the privacy and obviously protecting the data of all of the participants in the system is critical, but keeping the bad actors out is absolutely critical. And so it is, to me, it's a little bit less about the balance between the two and more about the implementation, I suppose, and how you do both at the same time.
Indeed. And I also, just before we wrap up, I do want to talk a little bit about crypto, because there's lessons to be learned, I think, from the crypto space that may apply to the CBDC space. And Usman, I might come back to you on this one because I know PayPal is engaging that area. Are there lessons you think that can be learned from the last few years' experience in crypto and its growing maturation that might be applicable to the development of CBDC over the coming decade?
Sure, no, and certainly, you know, we had some news, I guess, about 10 days ago on this front in terms of launching the ability to buy, sell, and hold for specific cryptocurrencies in the PayPal digital wallet. I think the first lesson is, we did it in compliance with existing laws, right? So having that, as Kabir keeps alluding to, having that regulatory infrastructure and the confidence to be able to offer a product that's going to be overseen is actually very important for the private sector. And so this broader effort that Chris, you're leading is just so important, I think, as we're building this out. The second piece is being able to have those digital wallets that offer security, connectivity into the individual users. This public-private partnership that's also at the center of what the DDP is doing, I think, is the other key learning that we are taking out of this is how do we build the ability for people to add new forms of payments, money, assets into their wallet, because that's what people want, and they want to be able to use there are different tools that, as we've said many times on this call, I don't think any of us see CBDC replacing all the other forms of payment. They're going to continue to exist because they have uses. So that's really, I think, one of the big learnings for us is how do we continue to add functionality for different users based upon what they need and what they want.
Kabir, would you add to that?
I wanted to quickly talk about the previous question, Chris. I strongly believe that the trade-off is a false trade-off. It's a false dichotomy. We do need to address privacy concerns. And in fact, the timing is perfect. As you know, as a country, we are heading into looking at a national data law of some sort. And more importantly, and this is something that's often missed in the conversation, our laws in the financial sector that govern data are severely outdated. They are a patchwork of 7, 8 laws. They are, as one study just observed, are point solutions. They're not comprehensive. They're not cohesive. We need to upgrade those anyway. I mean, the Financial Modernization Act of 1999, right, before the iPhone, was in an era of the marketing mailers. It was addressing privacy concerns associated with that era. So we have a huge upgrade we need to make anyway, and I think the timing is really perfect. I think in terms of the sort of lessons to be learned from the crypto space, the consensus conference is kind of interesting. As the years have gone on, it has become, gone from 90-10 or 100% non-regulators, no one was there, to largely policymakers and regulators over the years. And that's a great sign. And that's a sign of how regulators are very ambitious about embracing innovation, increasingly. They're ambitious about embracing innovation. And we've been very closely involved. Chris, you're aware of this, with Joanne Barefoot and the Alliance for Innovative Regulation to bring regulators along, not only in the US, but globally. So I'm very confident that the right minds around the table, we can address these challenges.
Thank you. Actually, it gives me a chance to give a shout out to my successor at the CFTC, Heath Tarbert. Just yesterday announced a revamping of their whole data infrastructure, the appointment of chief data officer, a division of data. I think it's the first agency to do it, and it is really the right move. Agencies need to become quantitative analysis regulators, something I called QuantReg during my time there, and I think that's a really step forward. But I do want to move back away from privacy and crypto for a second. And before we close, it's just really important that we touch upon the issue of remittances. There is close to $1 trillion in remittances moving around the world every year. A lot of that from the United States. And Shelley, I want to turn to you because this is an area where Western Union's got a lot of experience. How do you see the impact of CBDC on remittances around the globe and here in the United States?
Yeah, well, I suppose first thing is it'll depend a lot about how it gets implemented, I guess, and what sort of demand that creates from consumers, small businesses, and the like. I think one, maybe just picking up what Usman said a bit ago, right? I don't think any of us see it as replacing necessarily remittance solutions that are on the market today, but perhaps creating some new innovations, right? There are lots of options on the market today. All digital, by the way, whether it is, transferring money to or from an account, a wallet, a card, even cash in the instance of like our business at Western Union, right? Putting in cash, what are we doing with that? We're digitizing it so somebody can deposit it in a bank, a wallet, or pick up cash on the other side. So and more and more these solutions are, they're faster, there's more transparency. So I think ultimately it's going to depend, how does the CBDC get implemented, and can it augment or improve the remittance products that consumers have access to today. Now, we've talked a lot about already in this panel, there are many people that don't participate in the more digital products because they don't trust the system, or they just don't naturally, they're not naturally part of that financial system. So I think with the CBDC and getting those folks into the system, if you will, could have an impact, and a positive impact from a remittance perspective. So, I guess we'll see. Certainly, we're excited about what this could be from a financial inclusion perspective. Obviously, we're also looking at it just in terms of how can it make the remittance process, everything from things we've talked about today, the user experience, all the AML, KYC stuff, settlement. If it can make that whole system more efficient, ultimately that will benefit consumers and businesses.
Yeah, you make a very good point. That those percentages about unbanked and underbanked populations, they're not a monolith. It's a very diverse community in those categories, and their issues in terms of access to financial services have everything to do with, or have things to do with, from rural issues where there's not a lot of bank activity or not a lot of broadband access to inner city communities, to immigrant communities. It's a very, very diverse, and therefore it's about giving them access points, but it's not necessarily, there's no silver bullet to addressing those issues. And Usman, is there something that you'd add to the discussion of remittances? Because I'm sure it's something you've also thought about at PayPal.
Yeah, look, again, it's really about the speed, the trust, the ubiquity, right? If there's an ability to get money into the system faster, cleaner, simpler than cash, I think people are going to turn to it, and I think it will, that's where I see CBDC playing the biggest role, is as a cash substitute, right, rather than all the other electronic payments that already exist. The last thing I'll just leave with to wrap up from my end, we talked about the 20 million stimulus checks. Chris, you were alluding to this. 13 million people also received interest tax refunds from the government this year, as small as $5 as a check. Can you imagine sending a check for $5? It costs more in the mail and to send than the actual value of the thing. And sometimes remittances have that kind of cost structure as well. And so to replace that with something that actually gets money from point A to point B to the person who needs it, that's what we're really excited about.
All right, I'm going to do a quick lightning round, folks. So as quickly as you can, tell me if we could launch one public-private partnership pilot program, say on January 10th, 2021, to test out use of CBDC, what would you suggest we do? And I'll start with you, Kabir. What should we test?
Okay, government money into people's wallets and complete the chain of transaction with them moving it into a savings account or making a purchase on Amazon or another platform. So we demonstrate the full chain within a period of time, and ideally building on all the technological knowledge already captured at Singapore and London and elsewhere.
Terrific. Usman.
I mean, certainly Kabir's idea is great. I'd say, small businesses are a key part of the payments ecosystem. And so if we can figure out a way to get, them into the system early, particularly, minority entrepreneurs who've traditionally struggled with the existing financial system, if there's some way to tie them in through a pilot, maybe in a small rural area or something like that, you could really have a very powerful early pilot for this.
Great. Shelley, what pilot should we do first?
Well, I like both of those ideas. I guess I'll vote for Kabir's idea to start with, going from the government and getting the money directly in the hands of the citizens, because I think that's just critical need there.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, Kabir, Usman, Shelley. It's great. And Daniel, we're going to hand it off to you. We're ready to go on pilot programs January 10th, 2021. Let's get going.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank... Oh, sorry, Chris. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I personally think these have been some of the most insightful and interesting discussions on CBDC that I've heard yet. So I really want to thank all of our panelists and excellent moderators. So what I'm going to try to do is summarize quickly what I think I heard. And I'm going to go back to the theme I set out at the beginning, the moving from if to how and even when. And I think that these discussions really underscore exactly that transition that we're seeing in discussions around CBDC and the potential for real-world implementation. So on the first panel, I think my favorite line of the day was when Supendu said that Singapore is no longer testing CBDC because it works. So that was great. He talked about it largely in the wholesale context, but then we heard from Tom that from a Bank of England perspective, there's a real focus on the retail side of CBDC. He also appreciated my statement at the beginning that this is all going to require a big tent because of the number of different implications and the ways that a CBDC will trickle through a global economy and all the different stakeholders that it hits. We heard from Josh on global activity, really underscoring actually activity in South Asia. On our second panel, awesome conversation about wholesale application and markets. Aaron talked about instantaneous settlement and the potential of that with CBDC. John really emphasized infrastructure and plumbing, and I happen to very much agree with that. I think that a lot of what this is all standing for is the upgrade of our systems, the way we transact, the way we send information about value. Rob talked about real-world implementation of DLT systems within the markets and within that plumbing and infrastructure. And finally, we just heard, so I won't spend too much time because it's fresh in your minds, but we just heard an awesome discussion on retail application and the potential for enhanced access, inclusion, the potential for government relief being distributed through these systems. And what was interesting is it also highlighted the importance of public-private partnerships and implementation. We talked about privacy, and obviously privacy is a major theme. Danielle flagged at the outset that we've created a privacy subgroup to focus on these issues. We also talked about identity because digital identity is a core component or element, especially when you talk about retail application of CBDC. So overall, found it to be a fascinating day. Really thank everybody for participation. And again, because this requires a big tent, we encourage public participation in something that's truly transformational and has the potential to have a very positive impact on society. Chris, I think I may turn it back to you if you have a final word, and then we will try to stay true to our time here at 10:30 Eastern time.
Great. So, Daniel, when you and I penned our op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a year ago this month entitled, "We Could Land a Man on the Moon, We Can Certainly Send the Dollar into Cyberspace," I think we never anticipated the amount of momentum that would occur over the course of that year. And David Treat, when you and I were at Davos last January and announced the launch of the Digital Dollar Project, I think we never really anticipated how much of a catalyst would come about. But the catalyst perhaps wasn't so much all those conversations. The catalyst was COVID. COVID has really sped things up, and COVID has brought an important constituency to bear in this conversation, a constituency that perhaps wouldn't normally think about things like digital money and distributed ledger technology, because this constituency is a constituency that's concerned with social issues. And I think that the inability to get relief to people in a crisis, the inexactitude of using paper money and account-based money has really gotten a much broader group of folks. Daniel referred to a big tent, brought a big tent to bear. And COVID has done a lot of things, but it's really sped up time. Trends that might have taken 5 to 7 years are really now accelerating in the course of a year. And I want to end today's discussion with a prediction. Next Tuesday, we're going to have a major election in the United States, and it's going to result undoubtedly, no matter who wins, in a lot of change in public policy, whatever is the outcome. But here's my prediction. A year from now, whatever the outcome of next Tuesday, there will be still more development, still more enormous activity around the world on CBDC. I predict there'll be no slowing down, whatever the outcome of this election, both in the United States and around the world. And, you know, right now, there's a number of, you might call them pelotons, moving forward at the central bank level. And we discussed some of them today, certainly the Bank of England, the Banque de France, certainly Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and others are in that first peloton. I would say the United States probably is in the middle peloton at this stage. Not out in the first one, certainly not in the last one, and somewhere in the middle peloton. But, you know, the thing about pelotons, if you ever watch racing, they still need to keep up with that first pace peloton. There's a lot of work to be done here in the United States to keep pace with that front peloton. And, you know, it can't be done by the official sector alone. The right approach is a Big Ten approach. The right approach is public and private sector partnerships. That's the way the United States has always done big projects. And that's what the Digital Dollar Project is here to do, to bring that private sector involvement, energy, enthusiasm, the ability to do big projects fast, on time, and finance them, and bring the energy, enthusiasm of the private sector to bear. So we look forward to continuing our work with the public sector to to explore a central bank digital currency. And stay tuned. The Digital Dollar Project has a number of projects underway. One in particular, a work on privacy by a new privacy subgroup at the Digital Dollar Project. We'll be presenting early in the new year on their work in the field of looking at privacy issues related to a U.S. digital dollar. And there's other work underway that we'll be announcing in the coming months. So thank you very much for today. It's been really a great program. We thank our participants. We thank our audience.